My name was Davy Crockett. I was born in the year 1786 on the wild frontier of Tennessee. My ancestors were simple folk, hunters, pioneers, ranchers. I grew up in a world where every day was a fight for survival. When I was just 12 years old, my father sent me to work in service to help the family climb out of debt. I drove cattle, worked at mills, tended livestock. I learned to handle a rifle long before I mastered my first long word. At 15, I ran away from home. My family wanted to send me to school, but I was too wild for studies. I wandered the frontier, worked on farms, herded cattle. I lived among forests, rivers, and rocks. I learned to understand nature better than people. When I returned home a few years later, my mother barely recognized me. But I was no longer a boy. I was a man, hardened by the winds of the frontier. I married Mary Finley at the age of 20. Together, we began building a life on the edge of civilization. I was a hunter, a soldier, a carpenter. I knew my children would grow up in a world where a man had to be stronger than a beast, cunninger than an enemy, and tougher than winter. In 1803, I joined the militia to protect settlements from Indian raids. Those were hard times. Battles were swift, brutal, without mercy. I knew. On the frontier, there's no second chance. When the Anglo-American War of 1812 began, I took up my rifle again. I fought under Andrew Jackson. We marched through swamps and forests, fought in battles few would remember, but which forged us as a nation. I was always a simple man, but the people around me saw something more. They were drawn to me. They said, "Crockett speaks as he thinks." I knew no other way. When the war ended, I returned to a peaceful life. I hunted, farmed, traded furs a bit. But life on the frontier taught me, to change something, you must go where fates are decided. In 1821, I was elected to the Tennessee General Assembly. I wasn't a politician. I was a man of the people. I stood for the poor, the farmers, those who lived on the frontier and knew the cost of every drop of sweat. I wore plain clothes, spoke plain words. My speeches were short, direct, without polish, but they held truth, and people felt it. In 1827, I was elected to the United States Congress. I went to Washington, a capital that felt cold and foreign to me. It was full of high-ranking gentlemen who spoke in flowery phrases but did little. I spoke out against laws that hurt ordinary people. I fought against the Indian Removal Act. I knew driving people from their lands was unjust, even if they didn't speak our language. I often stood as a lone voice in a hall full of the wealthy and powerful. They mocked me for my simplicity, but I was proud of my roots. I never forgot where I came from. I said, "You can always find me on the side of the poor and true patriots." When they tried to silence me, I spoke louder. When they tried to buy me with promises of high office, I laughed in their faces. I was re-elected several times, but in the end, I lost. In 1835, I spoke words that were long remembered. "You can all go to hell, I'm going to Texas." I knew a new frontier awaited. There in the South, in Texas, free men were fighting again for their land, for their independence, and I chose to stand with them. I packed my things, said goodbye to my family, and set out on the long journey. I arrived in Texas not knowing where my road would end, but knowing exactly why it began. I was nearly 50 years old, but I didn't feel old. In my heart, I was still the same frontier hunter, only now carrying a heavier load of pain, faith, and stubbornness. Texas in those days was not a state, but a land with character. The people here wanted one thing, to be free. They didn't want to be watched from Mexico City, didn't want to obey laws they had no part in making. I understood them. I'd lived my life on the frontier, where the law is you and your conscience, and justice is what you're willing to stand for until the end. They welcomed me not as a stranger, but as a brother. I joined a band of volunteers. We had no uniforms, no pay, but we had what mattered most, a desire to defend the land we called ours. I reached San Antonio in January 1836. The Alamo was an old mission, a stone structure hardly built for large-scale defense, but it became a symbol of resolve, a symbol of resistance. With me were about 200 men of different faiths, farmers, blacksmiths, soldiers, immigrants, Texans, Americans. We weren't united by origin, but by conviction. We knew Santa Anna would not tolerate rebellion. We knew he'd come with an army, yet we stayed. Every day we strengthened the walls, repaired cannons, prepared. We trained, rationed supplies, kept watch. Some of us couldn't read, but every man knew how to hold a rifle, and every man knew death might come at dawn. On the 23rd of February, the Mexican army appeared on the horizon. There were thousands of them. We were no more than 200. We could have left. We could have surrendered, but no one did. We looked into each other's eyes and understood. We were here because we chose to stay. Command was shared between William Travis and Jim Bowie. Travis had an officer's sword, Bowie a knife that became legend. I led my boys from Tennessee, men I'd gathered myself. They were tough, stubborn, reliable, the kind I always trusted to have my back. Each morning began with cannon fire. Guns pounded our walls, stones crumbled, the ground shook. At night, we braced for assault. By day, we figured out how to survive until the next night. I wasn't a writer, but I kept notes. I wrote about each day, each sound, each look. I wanted, if we were gone, for someone to know we were here, not as shadows, but as men. Many called us mad to stand against such a force, but we weren't insane. We simply knew some things are worth more than life. Letters left the Alamo with couriers. We begged for reinforcements. We knew the odds were slim, but we hoped. Hope is a stubborn thing. Even when everything crumbles, it clings to the wall and holds on until the end. The 6th of March came. As dawn broke, trumpets sounded. The Mexican army began the assault. Thousands of soldiers came at us like a wave. We shot, fired, shouted, fought. We stood on walls, on roofs, in corridors. When ammunition ran out, we fought with rifle butts. When weapons broke, with fists. We battled for every stone, every yard. My men held until the last. I saw them fall, the ones who came with me from Tennessee. One by one, not one retreated, not one. They say I survived, that they took me alive, that I stood with my rifle, surrounded but unyielding, and then executed. I can't say for certain how it was, but I know this. Until my final breath, I felt no fear, only resolve. The Alamo fell. All inside perished. But something in the enemy died with us. Because weeks later, when Santa Anna's army was defeated, the fighters shouted, "Remember the Alamo!" We became the fire in the hearts of those who lived. We became the song sung at campfires. We became legend not for glory, but for truth. My name became a symbol of truth or myth. I heard years later, they wrote novels about me, made films, sang ballads. In them I was a giant, a jester, a saint, a rebel. But the truth is simple. I was born on the frontier, among trees and beasts. I learned to shoot, to speak truth, to never look away. I walked through wars, Congress, fields, farms, and in the end I chose my death. Not because I wanted to die, but because I wanted to stand. They called me the king of the frontier. I laughed. I wasn't a king, I was its son. I was Davy Crockett, and if every era has a voice, I was the voice of mine. Rough, stubborn, honest. The voice of those who built America not in halls but on the earth. What do you think of me and my story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe, like the video, and stay tuned. We're not saying goodbye yet.